Teenager. You've freshly arrived in this massive city, you're trying to spread your religious message, and your very first major interaction is handing a card to a guy double-fisting a beer who just straight up tells you he's on drugs. The diary even notes this guy claimed to have something else in his pocket, but then just flat out refused to say what it was. It perfectly, and kind of hilariously, illustrates this immediate clash between the missionary's pretty sheltered background and the totally unpredictable, raw reality of the streets. So let's jump into our truth major theme. Welcome to San Francisco, 1994, and see how this whole environment builds the ultimate fish-out-of-water story.
They were dropped right into the absolute heartbeat of this vibrant city. Their home base, a little apartment right near the iconic Haight and Fillmore Street intersection, and their daily commute meant hopping on the Muni 22 Fillmore bus. What's super fun is the author proudly scribbles in their journal that this is the exact same bus route used in the massive hit movie Mrs. Doubtfire, although they were quick to point out they wrote on a slightly nicer part of the route. But it wasn't all just buses and busy streets. They also felt this immediate warmth from the local community. They note a really wonderful evening where a local member of their faith took them out for an amazing Chinese food dinner. It paints this picture of a really exciting, super welcoming new life.
But that welcoming feeling could literally flip like a switch. After that lovely Chinese dinner, they found themselves trekking home at 9:30 at night in pitch darkness because of a delayed bus. The diary explicitly mentions walking past some truly scary-looking people on both sides of the road. So how do two 19-year-old guys deal with the creeping terror of a dark, gritty street? Humor. Pure, unfiltered teenage humor. To cut the incredible tension, the author's companion just randomly launches into this spot-on impression of Beavis from Beavis and Butthead. I mean, it's just such a relatable, humanizing moment, two young guys using MTV pop culture to basically laugh away their anxiety.
Moving on to culture shock in city streets, we really need to look at the profound shift they experienced walking into this incredibly dynamic, towering, and physically gritty downtown area. The visual difference alone from what they knew was just staggering.
And you can see this dramatic psychological shift happening right in the pages. They start reflecting on their memories of Utah, writing that looking back, it sounds kind of boring as a place to raise a family. They actually admit that back in Salt Lake City, if anyone looking even remotely edgy came within, say, 50 feet of them, they would be absolutely terrified. But cut to the reality of San Francisco, suddenly every single day is an adventure. They're literally walking shoulder to shoulder with folks they describe as freaky looking. And yet, they experience this total, complete loss of fear. It's a total 180.
And they were definitely surrounded by people who looked absolutely nothing like the folks back home. The visual landscape was completely overwhelming, but you can tell they were just fascinated by it. In fact, the diary gives the locals a ton of credit for their wild creativity. Downtown, they're marveling at the crazy hairstyles and the massive amount of piercings. They specifically call out one guy who had 5 piercings just in his lip, which the author honestly just thought looked incredibly painful. Then, riding the buses at night, the whole aesthetic shifted to heavy metal and punk. We're talking riders decked out in these massive heavy chains around their necks and jackets covered in huge metal spikes.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. Surrounded by the lip rings, the spiked jackets, the towering buildings, you totally expect a sheltered teenager to be having a complete panic attack, right? Instead, they rate this incredible realization. They felt deeply that their personal faith provided this impenetrable mental and spiritual shield. It gave them this absolute fearlessness in an environment that, just a few weeks prior, would have completely terrified them. It just goes to show how a powerful sense of purpose can literally rewire how you perceive the world around you.
Okay, let's take a look at their actual daily timeline, because this reveals the relentless grinding schedule they were on. I mean, this was absolutely no vacation. It was serious, non-stop work. On Thursday, they're teaching core principles to a really knowledgeable guy named Milton. Friday, a massive, sprawling physical hunt all across the city just looking for potential referrals. Saturday starts at the crack of dawn with breakfast and a correlation meeting to plan the whole week out. Sunday, they get into this deep 2.5-hour philosophical debate with a guy named Thomas. And boom, by Monday they're right back to it, reviewing the Book of Mormon with an older woman named Addie. The sheer momentum they kept up is just wild.
But of course, that daily grind was also incredibly frustrating, which brings us to the number 7. On Friday alone, these missionaries were handed 7 different referrals, 7 fresh leads of people to go visit. They spent the entire day tracking down every single one of those addresses across this massive city. And guess what? Absolutely every single person was gone. Strikeout after strikeout after strikeout.
And you have to remember what reaching those 7 empty homes actually required. It was a massive physical undertaking. That brings us to our next number, 10. 10 miles. They didn't have a car, right? They walked an exhausting 10 miles across a city that is famous for its brutal hills, all in a single day. The author actually notes in the diary that it seemed like forever.
But amazingly, they still made a point to stop and appreciate the incredible architecture and the breathtaking sights along the way.
Now, despite that deep feeling of spiritual protection we talked about earlier, the sheer reality of their physical vulnerability peaked that Sunday night. After their long philosophical chat with Thomas, they're walking down a dark street in a pretty rough part of town, wearing their standard missionary uniform, those thin black overcoats. Out of nowhere, some locals step up and confront them, straight up asking why they were wearing that down there and if they wanted to get beat up. Well, it turns out, in that specific neighborhood, two clean-cut white guys walking around in black overcoats looked exactly like undercover cops or FBI agents. Talk about a massive reality check. The author quickly realized that while they might have felt spiritually safe, physically, they were in some very real danger.
Let's transition to our final section, finding joy in the journey. Because this is really the secret to how they survived the exhaustion, the empty houses, and the street-level threats. They found immense humanity and a whole lot of humor in the everyday routine of just living with other teenagers.
Their apartment life and their daily little mishaps provided this hilarious, much-needed relief. Like on Saturday morning, they're being graciously hosted for a nice breakfast, and our author accidentally drops an egg directly onto their own lap and then just sits there, completely frozen, desperately praying nobody notices. We've all been there, right? They also found this deep, quiet joy in just attending church at the beautiful Pacific and Gough Street intersection, which felt as grand and peaceful as a temple to them. Then you have the funny office politics stuff, getting playfully chewed out by a fellow missionary, Elder Uwell, because they accidentally gave a very chatty, interested lady his phone number by mistake. And the absolute highlight of their weekend? Dying of laughter in their apartment because their roommates, Elder Bjorn and Elder Hymus, were recording fake answering machine messages using ridiculous, over-the-top grandpa voices. Just classic teenage stuff.
By Monday, the author notes that handing out those missionary cards is finally starting to feel completely natural. They reflect on the brutal 10-mile walks, the crazy lip piercings, the Beavis impressions, the very real threat of getting beat up, and the goofy answering machine pranks. And they sum up this entire wild, exhausting, beautiful experience with one profound realization. These are the best days of my life. It's such a powerful testament to how fully embracing a difficult, totally alien experience can actually lead to immense, unexpected personal joy.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. When were you thrown completely out of your element? Think back to a time when you were the fish out of water, maybe feeling totally intimidated by the unknown or the freaky. How did you adapt? And how did that initial culture shock ultimately transform your own perspective? Did you find your own version of armor along the way? I really hope this deep dive into a 1994 San Francisco diary sparks some fascinating reflections on your own life's journey. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.